don't know. But, uh-oh.
Sorry about that. You're good.
Should we just hit the continue on that?
Yeah. All good.
Okay. At any rate, when people talk about suburbanization on Long Island, what they ordinarily are thinking about really is the World War II, post-World War II, kind of suburbanization, Levittown, style developments, that type of thing. But suburbanization has been going on actually for considerably longer, and even longer than the time period I'm going to talk about now. There were what were effectively suburbs, mostly for wealthy people, who could access the island, including what we really think of today as the city, when they were seeking, some kind of respite from city life. What I'm going to talk about tonight are two examples of the kind of suburbs which developed in the period roughly from 1890 to about 1940, and to a large degree, they really slowed down in 1930 for the obvious reason of the Great Depression. One of the things which characterizes these suburbs is that they are really sort of what are called planned communities. And what they have in common is that they really begin with a particular person, sometimes a partnership, and they have a concept of what they want to build and how they want to build it, what the architecture is going to be like, who they're marketing to. And they also even think it down to such things as landscaping, street design, control of demographics, that type of thing. These were usually for what today we would call middle, and upper middle class people. They weren't for the very rich, but they certainly were usually beyond the reach of what would ordinarily be considered the working class at the time. And the first one I want to deal with is pretty well known because actually it's still in existence under its name, although it's a different form of government. And this is Brightwaters on the South Shore, which is right next to Bayshore. Brightwaters was really the brainchild of one of the more remarkable developers, certainly in his vision and the way he was able to create it, a guy by the name of Thomas Benton Ackerson, usually known as T.B. Ackerson. Ackerson is actually not originally either from the island or is not even from the city. He was born upstate, but he comes down to the city, and he does have a business background. It's not in building, however. It's not in home design or anything like that. He was involved in warehousing. He was also involved in what seems almost kind of a marginal type of enterprise, and that is ice. But before there was refrigeration, ice was actually, really kind of a big deal. At any rate, he does develop some understanding of how you put together a business organization, and he forms a company with his brothers. There are three of them, but he's really the brainchild, and it's named after him. It's the T.B. Ackerson Company. And then he goes into business, first of all, by building a couple of standalone houses, and then by trying a couple of developments, and he's very successful. The place where he first does them is in a place where a lot of suburbanization is going on, although we don't think of it as suburbanization because it is in in Kings County. Something was going on in Queens, and we tend to think of those as city. But if you go back 100, 120 years or more, you have to remember huge swaths of Kings and Queens were still very rural. There are even farms there. There are some large estates there. So there's a lot of land which is opening up. And what is happening as the pressure of population and the consolidation of the city is going to foster this, as this occurs, people are looking for new places to live, and a lot of them want something which is not quite as congested as the Lower East Side or Yorkville or any of the other places in Manhattan or the Lower Bronx. And what is going to drive this to a certain degree is going to be the extension of the city rapid transit system. And for Ackerson, access to mass transit is always a big factor in where he builds and how he's going to build and how he's going to market. And what he's looking at is the extension of what was then the BMT lines. Now it's all the New York City subway system, but some of you may remember there was originally an IRT, a BMT, and even an IND. So as it begins to move out, Ackerson sees his chance. And he'll build a couple of houses in a place called Beverly Square. A lot of these are still in existence. And then what he'll do is he'll develop his first major project, which is a place called Fisk Terrace. And at Fisk Terrace, he is going to pioneer and perfect a lot of the techniques which he's later going to use in Brightwaters. One of which is he's going to base his development on a pre-existing estate. In other words, you buy a large estate with a big block of acres, all right, that you can see that you can build enough units, that, it becomes a really profitable kind of enterprise. And he buys an estate, not surprisingly, from a family named Fisk. And he'll, then purchase a couple of outlying, much smaller tracts, and he'll put them all together. And again, he's also thinking that the BMT is coming through there. And in fact, his first real estate office, because the T.B. Ackerson Company is integrated. In other words, they have the construction part of it. They also have the retail sales part of it. They also have the landscaping maintenance part of it. So it's all put together. And the first real estate office which he has is right next to the BMT, which is coming through. And in fact, later on, when Ackerson's pretty much done with this terrace, it's completed or as completed as going to be under him, he sells the office to the BMT lines, and they use it as a station. Another thing which he is going to do, and he's going to brag about it, it's not necessarily that unique. There are a lot of good builders in Brooklyn and later on in Long Island at this time, but he does talk about his quality construction. It is good. And in fact, if you look up this terrace on the internet, you'll see that the people still living in these homes, they're very boastful about the fact that, they've got an Ackerson house, that kind of thing. He will also, and he's again not unique in this, but he certainly is a very early advocate. He uses it a lot. He will offer installment payments. In other words, you can put something down and then you can pay it off. So to a certain degree, he's also acting as a bank or a mortgage company as far as that's concerned. You can see from this particular card, I want to see if I put two of them in there. I did not. But you can see from this that, the streets are laid out with, the median stripped down, the sidewalks, you got, the trees planted, new growth for the new street. This is all thought out. And he has, people who are good at landscape architecture, as well as the people who are designing the houses. And he gets some of the best architects then working in Brooklyn. They're not necessarily the celebrity architects, and they're not the guys who are going to be doing things like the Phipps Estate, which we know is Old Westbury Gardens, but, they know how to do very good construction. They know how to get, the kind of house which has all the amenities you want on a particular, parcel of land. And they tend to work as they would work later in Brightwaters on variations on, let's say, 5 or 6 patterns. They may have even actually had pattern books. There were such things at the time called pattern books. Even Sears Roebuck, by the way, sold architectural designs at this time. And, you could have an idea for a house and you see the house, but I want it slightly different. Yeah, they can reconfigure it to a certain degree. But if you look at them, you find that there are probably 5 or 6 basic ones, and then they are altered, in different ways, what you want. They all have basements. They all have hookups to gas, to electricity, that type of thing. So it's a substantial kind of development. In terms of the styles, and it's a little hard to see from this picture here, they are very strongly influenced by what was then the arts and crafts movement, which was initiated by a guy some of you may have heard of, Gustav Stickley. He did a lot of furniture, but he also came up with designs for houses, and they were supposed to be both attractive to the eye, but also extremely practical. To some degree, he is affected by the colonial revival, which was then very big, but not as much as some other people. And he does a Fisk Terrace, pretty much from, approximately, 1903 to about 1907. He's pretty much done with it by '07, where his attention is being, directed elsewhere, although he's still selling some units at that particular point. At some point in time, he sees the possibility of an even more substantial development, one which he could put his imprint on, really from the beginning. There's really wasn't much else around it, which looked like it, out in Suffolk County next to the village of Bayshore. And this will become his community of Brightwaters. And he begins this really in 1907. He's probably beginning to purchase some land even before that. And as he did in Fisk Terrace, the project is centered on what was a pre-existing estate. This was, what we would call a rich guy's estate. This was a guy by the name of Phelps. And he had almost, 1,000 acres. So he's got a big chunk of land to begin with. And then he picks up another couple of hundred acres here and there. And so by the time he's done, he's got 1,300 acres in which he can, sort of reconfigure according to the vision which he has. And he's got a very distinct vision in mind. This sizable parcel is the reason why among his marketing, slogans is the 1,000-acre village by the sea. It's actually slightly larger. What he gets, in addition to this acreage, he gets what was sort of an average kind of South Shore stream. The ones which flow from the center part of the island and they go out, into the Great South Bay. And there were, a number of feeder ponds, which, more or less, went into this. And he looks at this and he sees, something very, very different by the time he's done. Any rate, again, T.B. Ackerson and Company is going to begin to advertise this new village by 1907. It doesn't formally open until 1909. And again, he's going to utilize the installment plans, all right, which he had done before. He's going to be working with a number of architects, some of whom we had worked with in Brooklyn. They have a general idea of the style which they want, although they'll vary it. And if you want something different and you're willing to pay for it, they'll do that too, although they will try to keep you from, putting some sort of eyesore right in the middle of it. And he's, got a couple of, designs on tap. So by the time, 1908, 09 come along, he's pretty much, along with his project, so everybody can see what it's going to be. This shows him this particular scene at the beginning when he is creating what is the keystone, as he sees it, of his project. And what they're doing is they're reconfiguring this stream which flows into the Great South Bay, and he's turning it into what he called the Grand Canal. Because his vision, all right, around which so much of this is going to operate is Venice. And there will be some later developments which will come along, which will try to duplicate this. No one will really do it as well as he does at Copeg.
We have a quick question.
Yeah.
It says, about what year is the picture of Glenwood Road, Flatbush?
This picture?
Yes.
That picture would be approximately 1910.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. It could be slightly earlier, but it's probably 1910. I think I got it from a publication That was 1909 or 1910. So if I say 1910, I'm pretty sure that I'm safe. At any rate, this is Ackerson tossing out the first shovel of dirt to create the Grand Canal. And the stream is going to be reconfigured. It's going to be bulkheaded. There are going to be plots sold on either side of it, roughly in a grid kind of formation. To the north, slightly inland, really just on the north side of the Montauk Highway, which sort of bisects Brightwaters. And if you go there today, you will see this quite easily. There's going to be his Grand Plaza, which is still there with the two pagodas which are there. And then what he does with the ponds, these feeder ponds which were up there, there are 5 substantial ones. What they'll do is they'll rework them, they'll bulkhead them, and they will turn them into what they call lakes. And they will put bridges over them, which are roughly based on the kind of bridges which you might see in Venice itself if you actually went there. Let's see, I want to make sure I got it. This is, and it's still roughly there as it is, this is the plaza. And you can see some people there. They got those wonderful, pre-World War I kind of outfits, and you can see the type of automobiles which they're using. All right. This scene, you're not going to see the ladies in the long dresses anymore, but you will see the pagodas and you will see the Grand Canal, which is there at by this point in time, in our time period, and really before World War II, almost all of this land is going to be filled in by houses on different kinds of plots. Most of the plots are, at least in this section, are about 100 by about 150, and you had rights to the use of the canal. You actually had a little a boat ramp which you could tie your boat up to. And in a lot of the advertising, they will emphasize, the kind of water sports which you have. There is also a bathhouse, no longer in existence, at the Great South Bay end of the canal. There was also a building that was pre-existing, but it was reworked, which they called the casino. Despite its name, no gambling was allowed. And also there was a park there called Wahepsee Park. Why Brightwaters, by the way, and perhaps I should have mentioned that first. Brightwaters, which is what Phelps called his estate. And there's some, local lore, and it's hard really to pin down whether it's true that this was based on an American Indian name for the area. Maybe yes, maybe no. At any rate, houses are actually being constructed in 1909, but Ackerson does not officially announce the opening really until 1910. And this is a picture of the bathhouse. Unfortunately, that is no longer in existence. I'm not sure exactly why they tore it down. Maybe it cost too much to run in later years, but it gives you some idea of what it was. This is the casino. All right. This was actually meant to be, to serve as kind of a clubhouse for Brightwaters, and there were dances there during World War I. There was, war bonds, being sold there. There would be, things, such as receptions, engagement parties, all that other kind of stuff. And of course, in the advertising, there's a lot of advertising. There were really, super, booklets for Brightwaters, particularly in the period 1909 to 1914, before the war comes along, with these wonderful vignettes. All right, they come in different sizes. Some of these also show up in newspapers. And of course, what they are selling to a large degree is the very healthy, happy, and secure kind of lifestyle which you can have in Brightwaters. And, you can see the kids playing, a lot of water kind of sports are there. Fishing, you got bathing, but they don't leave out other stuff. You got tennis going on up there. You got golf going on. You got equestrian sports there. If you don't want to go down to the bay and you think that, the group which is in the canal are a little too rough, that was wasn't really true. But they did, by the way, have competitions, with races in the canal, and the losing team got thrown in the water. But at any rate, you could, get in your canoe and you could then, sail around in the lakes, or you could take your sailboats. I mean, there's a lot of sailing going on there. One of the things which I don't think I have in this one, let me see what I have, another one there. Well, you can look at this one too, but another thing which Ackerson tried to emphasize is what he considered the relative convenience of going to Brightwaters after the Long Island Railroad opened up its East River tunnels. And supposedly it would only take slightly longer than an hour. I'm not sure that was true. I'm pretty sure it's not true today, but at any rate, supposedly it was convenient. What is interesting is what he doesn't really say anything about is automobiles. You don't get a lot of talk about automobiles until you get into the 20s and beyond. This is, another style of advertisement, but again, here you see, what they call the Venetian Yacht Harbor, also called the Grand Canal. Down here, you can see the plaza, the pagodas are still there. They'll send you a pictorial album. These are collector's items pretty much today. And of course, you see the people swimming. I'm not sure they're swimming in the Great South Bay, or they are swimming in the canal. You'll notice down here, he talks about bungalows and cottages. What happens is the Ackerson Company, and again, it's his vision. His brother Charlie runs the construction end of it. He's got another brother who does most of the day-to-day stuff with selling real estate. TV shows up, from time to time. But he's got a lot of land, and he develops it slightly differently. Along the canal, or the Venetian Yacht Harbor, all right, you're going to see, basically a grid type of system, straight, roads and crossroads, et cetera. You go into lakes because the ponds were, not necessarily in any kind of regular order, and the bridges are connecting them. Then the roads are more curvilinear, and they sort of swoop around, so, you can get into the different parts. But then, because now you're on the north side of the Montauk Highway, he develops other styles which use different types of houses primarily. All right, so then you go into sections which he calls oaks, calls pines, calls pine terrace, Pine Air. There still is a Pine Air Drive. And at the very northernmost reach, which would have gone into roughly the grounds of what was Pilgrim State Hospital, there was even an experimental farm. And the further you went inland, generally speaking, the size of the houses declined. And you really did go from, what were, variants of the arts and crafts style to using bungalows, which were considerably simpler to build. But again, the construction was good, the area was good, and the terms were often very, very good, because they wanted to sell this stuff as much as possible. And you see pictures like this. This is a great one. It didn't come out so good on the slide, I'm not sure. It's a little blurry, but here you have, the children. And what they're doing is they've got, their little rowboat out in the lake section. Most of those bridges, by the way, are still there. And I suspect some of you have explored Brightwaters. But if you haven't, it's really a nice experience. The houses themselves, they varied in terms of, what they might, go for at the time. He built approximately 200 of them from 1907 to 1917, which is an important time for him. But basically, they went from about $10,000, maybe up to $20,000 for a really super example. And the bungalows were markedly less. This was another type of advertisement which Ackerson put out. These bird's eye views were popular in the late 19th, early 20th century, sometimes, particularly back, in the 1870s, 80s, landowners, even, some of the better off farmers, they get an artist, who could conceive, of a bird's eye, view of what their holdings look like. And of course, real estate people began to figure it out. And here you can see, the Montauk Highway going along down here. Here is the Long Island Railroad. This section in the lighter kind of coloring there, that's Brightwaters, and over here is Bay Shore proper. If you look down here, you can see this is the Grand Canal, or the Venetian Yacht Canal. Over here, you have the plaza. Also, this is where his real estate office is. I'll say more about that later. And then you go up into the lake section. And then as you get north of the railroad tracks, then you go into sections which are primarily bungalows. The houses are somewhat more modest, but surprisingly not always. This is just a couple of examples. And by the way, and you can find a lot, there is a great deal of the original housing stock that the Ackerson Company built, which is still in Brightwaters, especially in the canal area and the lakes area. But at any rate, here are two of them there. And they're substantial houses. They're not on, the ones particularly in the canal are not on huge plots. People didn't necessarily want them. They did get electric lights. They did have, ranges. They did have, basements. They did have very good woodworking inside, that type of stuff. They were quality homes. Let's see, here's another one. This is more eclectic. Sometimes this is called Queen Anne style, or sometimes simply American eclectic. And what they did was they took what was more of a basic design, you stick a turret on it, that type of thing. And you could go and you could look at pattern books, you could look at designs, you could tell them roughly what you wanted, and they would work with you, they being the Ackerson Company. And if you brought in your own architect, that'd be fine, they'd work with him too. But the idea, they did want to work with him because they didn't want somebody doing what some people do in places today, where you have something which is so totally out of character to what's there. It's almost like a thumb in one's eye. This is, one of the more modest bungalows. All right. And again, these are mostly up north of the railroad tracks, but not entirely. But you were still in a very well run and very well designed community. And who ran it? Well, there was a Brightwaters Association. And Ackerson didn't put his name on it, but he had his friends on it. And what they did was that they basically controlled the real estate sales. They also controlled the kind of zoning and covenants. The only covenants that I've seen in Brightwaters would be ones which, regulated, what you could do, let's say for size of your, fences or hedges, which weren't supposed to be taller than 4 feet, which prohibited any kind of commercial activity, putting up an auxiliary structure, which is too close to the, your neighbor's property, things which would be pretty, what would you say, expected, and the kind of things which HOAs do very much in our own time period. Now, if you wanted to go, you've been reading the papers and you look at, all those ads for Brightwater, say this looks pretty good. The expectation was before the First World War again, still that you'd probably come out by the Long Island Railroad. That didn't mean people couldn't come by car, but they were still thinking this was, the main way people were going to go there. And in fact, Ackerson had a bus which would meet, I guess certain trains, or if you told them, earlier, and you gave them, a reservation, so to speak, they'd meet you at the station, and they'd bring you to the real estate office. And this is the Ackerson real estate office, which is still there. What is not there is something else which Ackerson had built, and this is this wonderful tower. And you could go up this tower. By the way, you could see a map laid out like that sort of bird's eye map in the real estate office, but you could go up in to the tower and you could look over the whole development. and you could see the plot that you were interested in on the map and see where it was in relation to the rest of the community, and you could make your selection that way. Then you could go down and you could talk about, what you're thinking about for the style of house, and how you're going to pay for it, whether you're going to need terms. And again, they did offer installment payments. All right, let's hold on to this just for a minute. Ackerson also, I mean, he's always, he's a promoter. I mean, he's got a vision, and certainly, it's still there, when it's lasted over 100 years, at least in most of Brightwater. Some of it will not last, I'll get into in a minute. But one of the ways in which he tries to get, Brightwater is known is he tries to, sell homes to the celebrities at the time, city officials. For example, the guy's name is Hornstable, who designed the Queensboro Bridge. He buys a place, in Brightwaters, and also he tries to sell to the celebrities, particularly people who were in vaudeville, and he gets some of them. Some of them perform at the casino, and also he is usually credited. It's not entirely set in stone, but he's usually credited with getting the Vitagraph Film Company to set up a studio on Long Island. Their first studio, their major studio, was in Brooklyn, and Ackerson apparently knew the principals there when he was building Fisk Terrace, but he convinces them that Bayshore is also a great place, that you could have a studio, it's more rustic, you can do different kinds of scenes. And so some of the people come out. This is Annette Stewart. She was the sweetheart of the silent screen. Unless I guess you're a film buff, you're probably not going to be familiar with the name, but she was, very well known in the First World War period and after, and of course, over time, stars fade, and who knows, maybe even we won't even be thinking about, I don't know, Julia Roberts, in 30 years very much, unless you're into film. Now, the First World War puts a damper on home building and, house construction, especially once the United States is fully involved. We're sort of involved in it from the beginning, but by 1917, we're in it fully. And what happens is, it gets harder to get materials. And also, people are going into war industries, there's a draft going on, there's not as much action. And it's clear that something is going wrong with the Ackerson Company. And by 1917, they're beginning to have auctions of unsold plots, and they're also selling off virtually en masse a lot of the newer developments north of the Montauk Highway. The Experimental Farm goes, Pine Air pretty much goes, Pines goes, and that kind of stuff. And the plots which they still had in some of the more developed areas, they're beginning to sell them off. And in fact, some of the newspapers in the real estate sections, they're wondering, why is he selling it off like in 1918 when you can't get very much money, when everybody's pretty sure, give it another year, and this is coming back because the war will be over and it's going to be all this pent up demand. Ackerson says no. And in fact, he relinquishes control, the control he had through the Brightwaters Association. And Brightwaters, at least south of the railroad, that is basically the lakes and canal sections, becomes an incorporated village. And he's really out of it in terms of exercising control. They sell off all of their materials. They had a lumber yard, they had a brick yard, they practically had a railroad siding for all of their construction stuff. All of that is sold. And by the end of 1918, in fact, Ackerson declares bankruptcy. Unlike a number of people who declared bankruptcy, 1919 is a bad year. It's a recessionary year. Begins to pick up in 1920 again, but 1919 is bad. But unlike a lot of people who declared bankruptcy, Ackerson pays people back. Surprisingly, he makes a rebound. And he makes a rebound on the other side of the island. He makes a rebound outside of Roslyn. And he's starting a new development, which he calls Flower Hill. But while he's really just getting started with it. He gets a cold. The cold turns to bronchitis. Bronchitis turns to pneumonia, and he's dead in 1924. Flower Hill, I don't think bears too much of his stamp. He didn't have a chance to, but Brightwater certainly does. In 1907, when they had their centennial, because their official founding is 1907. Did I say 1907? 1977, when they have their centennial. 1907 is when Ackerson turns over the first shovel load of dirt, at the canal, trying to reconfigure. At any rate, they do an inventory in about 2/3 of the homes. There are ones which he had built. So it remains to a large degree very much his brainchild, and it is one of the more attractive developments on Long Island. Now, I've got another presentation for you, but I wonder if you have questions about Brightwaters, because we're going to have to switch gears and go to a new program. Any questions at this point? We can hold them all till the end if you'd like. No? All right, let's see if this works again. Okay, do you have that?
I just see the screen with the files. Try clicking one more time.
Okay. I've got it up, so did it show?
No, not yet.
Not yet. All right. How about that?
Yep, I see that.
Okay, good enough.
Perfect.
All right. What I'd like to do is to jump across the island about 20 miles and roughly about 20 years from when T.B. Ackerson basically leaves Brightwaters, and talk about something else. And this is a development called Oldfield South. And like Brightwaters, it is sort of the brainchild and I guess what you might call vision of a father and son team. This is Frank and Ward Melville. And certainly the name Ward Melville, and probably even Frank Melville, is very familiar to anybody in the Three Village area, since they literally put their stamp on a lot of it. The Melvilles, of course, originally make their money in shoe manufacturing. They were the owners of what was once a very well-known brand by the name of Tom McCann. The money then goes into other areas. But they settle in Oldfield in the very first years of the 20th century. In fact, I think they buy Frank does his estate in 1901. And he's very interested in history. He's very interested in historic preservation. He and later on Ward are very much influenced by the colonial revival. And what this was a fascination, and I don't want to call it a fad, but a wave of interest in the art and architecture of the colonial period, which really gets rejuvenated by the centennial in 1877. And it's one of the things which will inspire, the Rockefellers, to do their restoration of Williamsburg, but they're very much interested in that kind of thing. And they settle in Oldfield, and they believe that the three villages with Seatucket, Stony, Brook, have, this remarkable, collection of colonial architecture, and they retain a lot of the more rural character, which, was being certainly eroded on the western end of the island. And this is going to, affect what they're going to do. One of the things which they're going to do as well is to try to control the kind of development around them. All right, so they're in Oldfield, which will become obviously an incorporated village, and they see, what Seatucket and Stony Brook still have, at least in their older core, and they want to try to make sure that the suburbanization, which apparently they think is likely to come, is going to follow along lines they are likely to follow or that they are going to support. So what Frank does is in 1925, he forms a company called the Naskig Land Company. Ward will later turn this into the Suffolk Improvement Company. And among the things they do is they're going to purchase about 250 acres to the immediate south of Oldfield proper. And this will become the development which they simply call Oldfield South. They'll never incorporate it, but they will control it through the Suffolk Improvement Corporation. And while certainly they're interested in profit, they're at least as much interested in making sure that the development that does occur to the south of them is going to be along lines which they agree with. And so one of the first things they'll do, let's see if I have it here. No, this is Frank. Sorry. Should show you some other pictures of him. He dies in 1935, and so I'm not sure when this is taken from the looks of the car. Cars rather, it looks like early 30s. But one of the things which Frank and Ward, when he's done with college, will do is they will turn to the Elmstead Brothers, who are landscape architects. They're descended from the Olmsted who designed Central Park, and they come up basically with a master plan. And what they will do is they will lay out at least the basic plots. They could be altered. Their plots usually are run from somewhere between 1/4 to 3/4 of an acre. They lay out the basic street grids. You can see how they do that. They also do think about landscaping, and they also believe that there's going to be, as a center piece for this community, there's going to be a club, which is going to be open to membership. If you have to apply, and to friends of the members. And they're also going to have a cabana section up on the Sound itself. This is an artist's rendition of the clubhouse. The Elmstead Brothers don't do the clubhouse. The clubhouse, and also almost all of the houses themselves, are either done by or approved by an architect by the name of Richard Haviland Smythe. It's got a Y in it, not an I. And he's very, very active, anytime really from the 30s, well into the 50s. He was a college roommate of Ward Melville's. They see eye to eye. They're very interested in colonial revival. And, Smythe is going to make sure that Ward's conception and Frank's conception of how this development is going to develop is going to be according to the way they think that it should. And through the Suffolk Improvement Company, they can pretty much do just that. They determine the architecture, they can determine the plot size, they also have ways in which they will try to control the demographics. Also, the building, the contracting is done by personal friends, contacts of the Melvilles, first Spaulding, and later on Carl Heiser. And we'll go to the club again. This is a picture in the 1930s, and sorry, I messed that up by doing that. That is Frank right in the center. This is the clubhouse. And, this was, again, the center of a lot of things. Among them were equestrian sports. They do talk about water sports because they've got the Sound area, but they actually emphasize equestrian activities. The woodlands are still theirs. There are, horse shows, which are going to be held there. I think the Smithtown Hunt, which was sort of like, a Meadowbrook Hunt club, is there at the time as well. But if you want to become a member, you not only have to pay, you have to be approved for membership. But if you've got a house there, it was much, much easier. This is one of them. All right, this was marketed by Carl Heiser. It was a friend of Ward Melville's. And this would be either a Smythe house or one which Smythe approves. You could, as you could in Brightwater, You could go to the Suffolk Improvement Company and you could say, look, I got an idea for a house. And, you know, if it fit in their overall conception, it'd be okay. What Smythe did is he took, sort of existing concepts of what a colonial house looked like, but he was able to merge them together. So this one is really sort of a hybrid. It's sort of colonial on one end, and it's a little bit more arts and crafts on the other one. I want to see if I have one more of these. This is a somewhat larger one, more like what we think of as a colonial revival. Who are they marketing to? Well, they're somewhat similar to Brightwater's in the sense that they're marketing to upwardly mobile young people. But they're a little bit more on the snob appeal, truthfully, whereas Ackerson, frequently tries to downplay, if anything, the size and the quality of the houses. He talks about them as being modest or moderate. The Suffolk Improvement Company, which is basically the Melvilles, they talk about mini estates, they talk about petite estates, they talk about small estates for country gentlemen. In some of their advertisement, they're a little bit apologetic about the fact that it takes, about an hour and 40 minutes to get from Stony Brook into the city. They're still thinking about people coming out by train. Again, like the Ackersons, they're slow to see the possibilities of what automobiles, could do. But they also say, hey, it takes a long time, but, they have very nice club cars. And besides which, the lengthy, ride rather, may keep out certain undesirable types, so it's actually good. And they do play on, the healthy recreational kind of lifestyle. Let's hold that, basically for a minute. They'll do something else. A lot of developments do have restrictive covenants, and I mentioned some of the ones the Ackersons have. The Ackerson ones are basically about land usage and about, the aesthetics of the ways they look. And the Suffolk Improvement Company does the same thing, except they add in prohibitions on anybody other than white people owning any of the houses in Oldfield South. The covenants are good for 20 years, and then they could be either renegotiated or revoked. And actually what happens by the 1950s, they're falling into disuse. And as he's getting older and he's really thinking more about some other things, Melville begins to basically turn over most of the control of Oldfield South to an Oldfield South. I forget what their official name is. Basically, it's a homeowners, association. And of course, if you know anything about the Melvilles, coming from the Three Village area, that they're involved in all kinds of things besides this kind of property development. And by the way, there were a couple of smaller property developments, which Ward in particular gets involved in. But by the time you get to the 1940s, his attention is really, straying from Oldfield South. By the way, they open up at a terrible year. They open up in 1929. They seem to be able to continue to make sales through the tough days of the 30s. And of course, it picks up and it goes into the 50s when basically they're out of it. But, they're not opening in auspicious times. But by the 1940s, Ward is beginning to think more about other things, and you know what some of them are. By 1939, he purchases the Three Village Inn. That Haviland Smythe, once again, he restores it or he reimagines it, the way it should have been in colonial times. And of course, today it is a well-known restaurant. He also creates it's got two names. It's called Stony Brook Crescent. Now, the post office is sort of the keystone of it. It's also known as the Colonial Shopping Center. And basically what he wanted to do was to recreate Stony Brook the way he thought it always should have been. And he wants to do this along good colonial revival lines. He's going to control the architecture. He's going to control the style on it. But in order to do it, he's going to also be removing some houses which were historic, some of which he simply relocates, a couple of which I think are actually destroyed, but he does create this Stony Brook Crescent. And of course, the post office is very famous, not only for its eagle, but because, as probably most of you know, the eagle will flap, on the hour, and you can actually win bets by, predicting that this is going to happen. He also was involved in restoring or recreating or reimagining parts of Setauket, the area around the tidal mills, and he creates the Frank Melville Memorial Park, which he names after his father, is still there. And he's instrumental in the Long Island museums, particularly not only in the endowment, but also in some of the art collections, especially the early Long Island painters, William Sidney Mount being, I guess, paramount among them. So he's doing all kinds of stuff in, Stony Brook, Setauket, Oldfield South, and to a large degree to keep it with what he believes is its historic or its traditional character. And again, Richard Haviland Smythe is, sort of the architectural and artistic, tool for this. And people like Carl Heiser and Bayless Manus are heavily involved as his right-hand men in this type of thing. And as you probably know, one of the last things which he does is he tries to arrange for the creation of what becomes the university at Stony Brook, originally SUNY Stony Brook. Probably most you know the story. He has a handshake deal with Governor Averill Harriman, gives the state 450 acres. He's thinking of a university which is going to be on the lines of William and Mary. If you've ever seen it in Williamsburg, it is beautiful. And it is basically 18th century brick design. Nelson Rockefeller comes in, he's got a very different attitude about it. And from all pretty reliable reports, Melville is disgusted by what comes out of it. But if you're traveling through the Three Village area, through Oldfield South itself, through Stony Brook, through the museum area, there is no doubt that a lot of it is a monument to him and his father and the way they saw these areas surviving and being expanded. And if you're interested in more about this topic, I just want to show you something. If you can put this up on the screen, I don't know. This is a book called Gardens of Eden, and it's about the early planned economies in the early 20th century, basically, pre World War II. And there are 25 of them, which are covered in the book. A couple of them are in Queens, such as Jamaica Estates, Douglas Manor. Most of them are in Nassau and Suffolk. Many of them are still extant, not all of them as, let's say, well preserved in the original vision as Brightwaters or Oldfield South, but a lot of them are there. It's an interesting book, how this movement gets going and the people who are responsible for it. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to try to answer them.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box.
No questions? I was either very good or I was terrible. I don't know which.
Any last minute thoughts?
From me?
From anyone.
Okay. Well, I think I said everything that I can really say, about, these two developments. If there's a question, it might jar my memory, but
We have one that just says, what is the name of the book? Could you put it in the chat?
I'm sorry. I know it's on that little tile, so it's hard to see. The title is Gardens of Eden, which is the way a lot of these people marketed this. Remember Brightwaters, they called it, this is the new Arcadia. It's edited by Robert B. Mackay. It's spelled like McKay. And he not only edited, he contributed to it. He was the director of SPLIA, the Society for the Preservation of Long Island Antiquities, who published it. They're now called Preservation Long Island. And a lot of libraries have it. And I bet Emma has it.
All right, well, if we don't have any more questions, then thank you very much for all of your knowledge. And thank you everyone for your attendance. It's greatly appreciated.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me.
Of course.
All right. Good
Have
night
a
to
good
all.
night, everyone.